Hi, I'm Alex, and this is The Last Climb. Today I'm covering cases of egoistic Karens taking on Mount Everest, where confidence meets one of the harshest environments on Earth. From a boutique owner stepping off the trail for a photo, to a corporate executive who pushed toward the summit 5 hours behind schedule, pressing on despite low oxygen and worsening conditions. It was May 18, 2016, on the upper slopes of Mount Everest, along the South Col route at around 25,000 feet. Above that point was the death zone, where the human body can only function for a limited time. Climbers move through it, knowing that delays aren't just inconvenient, they can become dangerous very quickly. Alina Vorsk, 41, worked in luxury real estate in Naples. She was used to controlling schedules and getting results on her own terms. She had climbed Mount Rainier and Denali, but nothing at this altitude. She joined a commercial expedition expecting structure and support, but not necessarily the level of discipline required. From the way this starts, it feels like she approached Everest as something she could manage, not something that would push back. The route above Camp 4 was made up of steep ice slopes with fixed ropes. Temperatures stayed around -20 degrees Fahrenheit, and winds were expected to increase later in the day. At that elevation, oxygen levels dropped to about 30% of sea level, making every step harder. Most teams leave before dawn to avoid deteriorating weather later on. Her expedition leader set a 1 a.m. departure time. That's standard, but Alina refused. She didn't want to start that early and pushed for a daylight climb instead. She eventually left around 6 a.m., about 5 hours behind the main group. That delay doesn't just put you behind schedule, it puts you in a completely different version of the mountain. As she moved higher, she began encountering climbers already descending from the summit. That meant stopping frequently, stepping aside, and waiting for others to pass. At that altitude, every stop takes effort to recover from. Breathing becomes more labored, and it's harder to regain momentum. Those pauses may not seem like much, but up there, they add up faster than people expect. By late morning, winds on Mount Everest reached 35 miles per hour. Blowing snow reduced visibility to under 30 feet, and the route became difficult to follow. At 25,500 feet, she paused on a narrow traverse, but stiff hands and hardened ice left little margin for error. Attempting to clip into the next anchor, her crampon caught, she fell sideways, and while the rope stopped her from falling down the mountain, it swung her into the slope, causing multiple rib fractures and serious head trauma. She was left suspended, unable to stabilize herself. At that point, it's not just about technique anymore. It comes down to whether your body can respond, and hers was already under too much stress. She couldn't regain proper footing, her movements slowed, and her coordination dropped. The cold continued to affect her. Her body was losing heat, and her ability to react was fading. You can see how everything starts stacking here. Fatigue, cold, and now injury. None of it is immediate on its own, but together it becomes overwhelming. Other climbers were nearby, but they were also slowed by congestion and worsening conditions. It took time for anyone to reach her, and at that altitude, time is limited. She remained in that position for over an hour. During that time, her condition continued to decline. The exposure, combined with her injuries, made recovery unlikely. Without movement or proper shelter, her body couldn't keep up with the stress. Her guides eventually reached her and tried to stabilize the situation. But moving an injured climber at that altitude, in those conditions, is extremely slow. Winds continued to increase and visibility remained low. Even with help, there's only so much anyone can do up there. The mountain sets the pace, not the people. By the time they secured her, she had already lost consciousness. She did not respond after that point. Her body was recovered 3 days later, once conditions improved enough for a safe retrieval. The cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma, with severe hypothermia as a contributing factor. Delayed timing, prolonged exposure, and exhaustion were also noted. Looking at how it unfolded, it all traces back to that early decision. Starting late didn't seem critical at the time, but up there, small choices don't stay small for long. It was June 27, 2017. At Angel's Landing, where the final approach required hikers to navigate a narrow sandstone ridge, 5,790 feet above sea level, exposed on both sides with only partial chains for protection. Maribel Quent, 34, owned a boutique clothing store in San Diego and frequently shared curated travel photos online. Though she had moderate hiking experience, her focus was more on capturing the perfect shot than following safety rules. From what I see, her priority wasn't the summit, it was the photograph. The final half mile of the trail is a narrow ridge with drop-offs exceeding 1,000 feet. By midday, temperatures had climbed to around 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The sandstone surfaces were polished from years of foot traffic, with smooth areas made even more slippery by a thin layer of sand blown across the trail by the wind. Chains were available in some of the most exposed sections, but large portions of the ridge remained unprotected, relying entirely on hikers' judgment and careful movement. Even under normal conditions, this ridge can be unforgiving. Add a layer of loose sand and heat, and one misstep is all it takes. Signs posted along the trail warned hikers to stay on the designated path and avoid venturing onto unprotected ledges. Rangers that morning had briefed visitors on recent incidents involving photographers stepping off trail. Maribel had heard the warnings, but dismissed them as excessive. She moved beyond the chain several times to adjust for better shots, shifting her stance and testing the edges to get the right angle. From where I'm looking, it probably seemed harmless to her at the time. But on a narrow, exposed ridge like that, every extra step onto unstable ground made an accident far more likely. As she neared the summit, she spotted a ledge about 8 feet beyond the official trail that promised a clear, unobstructed view of the valley below. From a distance, it looked stable, but it was sloped and covered in loose sand. Maribel stepped past the boundary rope and moved toward the ledge, testing each foot placement carefully, but missing how the surface could shift beneath her. Her camera bag, weighing roughly 12 pounds, subtly shifted her center of gravity, forcing her to lean forward slightly to maintain balance. Here, you can see how even a small shift in weight or footing can completely change your stability. Those few extra pounds made the difference. Sandstone beneath her was smooth, with almost no texture to grip. As she adjusted for the photo, her right foot began to slide on the sand. She tried to correct, but instead accelerated the movement. Her hands reached for a hold, but the smooth rock offered nothing to grab. Within seconds, she was sliding uncontrollably toward the edge. Momentum carried her over the precipice. Witnesses reported she disappeared from view almost instantly. The fall was estimated at roughly 1,000 feet. That moment is almost impossible to stop once it begins. One slip and gravity takes over. It's a brutal reminder of how thin the line is between safe and fatal. Other hikers immediately alerted park rangers via emergency communications. Immediate rescue was impossible due to the exposed terrain, so recovery waited until conditions allowed a helicopter later that afternoon. Death was confirmed as instantaneous from blunt force trauma, with contributing factors including leaving the trail unstable, footing, and extra weight from her camera. It's striking how fast it happened. A few missteps off the trail, and that was enough. Everything else just made it worse. The incident received little public attention, noted only in seasonal park reports, serving as a reminder that even routine hikes can turn fatal when safety boundaries are ignored. Looking back, the decision to prioritize a photograph over safety stands out clearly. It's easy to think you can handle this, but the mountain doesn't negotiate. That's what makes incidents like this so sobering. The consequences arrive before you even realize the danger. It was May 9th, 2015, at Camp 2 on Mount Everest, 21,300 feet up. Thin air, minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures, hidden crevasses, and icy patches made every step risky. One misstep could be deadly. Tessa Crane, 37, worked as a corporate consultant in Chicago. She thrived on pushing herself in high-pressure situations and expected that same drive to carry her up Everest. She had climbed several 14,000-foot peaks in Colorado, but nothing had prepared her for the sustained physiological stress of staying above 18,000 feet. 18 months of training had convinced her she could handle the climb. I can see she trusted her mental toughness more than her body's signals. That's a mistake a lot of people make up here, thinking willpower is enough. Altitude sickness often begins subtly, a headache, mild nausea, dizziness. But at 21,000 feet, these early signs can escalate rapidly. On the morning of May 9th, Tessa reported a mild headache and slight nausea, but insisted she could continue to Camp 3. Her guide recommended immediate descent to Camp 1. She refused. I get it. She probably felt like stopping would mean failure. But up here, ignoring your body is never worth it. Over the next several hours, her condition worsened. The headache intensified, nausea turned into repeated vomiting, and dizziness made each step uncertain. The cold and wind made rest stops. Exhausting, slowing the team even more. Every fixed rope she gripped required extra effort, and her balance became progressively unreliable. I can't help thinking how small decisions start stacking up. The choice to push forward despite the warning signs is one that snowballs quickly. By early afternoon, Tessa had developed high-altitude cerebral edema, a condition where fluid buildup in the brain causes swelling that impairs thinking, coordination, and consciousness. Her steps were unsteady, her grip on ropes weakened, and she needed constant support from the guides. On a steep section between Camp 2 and 3, she collapsed entirely, unable to move on her own. Breathing became irregular, supplemental oxygen barely helped, and the technical terrain made any descent slow and risky. It's kinda terrifying seeing someone so prepared and determined get beaten by altitude. You train and prep for months, but the mountain has its own rules. The guides worked carefully to move her down, securing ropes and taking each step slowly. Her intermittent consciousness made coordination impossible, and at times, she was completely unresponsive. Weather conditions and steep slopes prevented a rapid evacuation. I can't imagine how helpless it must feel to watch, knowing every second counts, but there's only so much you can do at that height. Hours passed as her condition deteriorated. The guides monitored her vitals and tried to prevent further decline, but the combination of brain swelling, hypoxia, and physical exhaustion progressed beyond the point where rescue alone could reverse it. Eventually, she lost consciousness permanently. It's sobering. There's no arguing with physiology at this altitude. The body just shuts down when it can't cope. The medical officer later confirmed the cause of death as high-altitude cerebral edema, with contributing factors including her refusal to descend when symptoms first appeared and the delayed recognition of the severity of her condition. It's hard not to reflect on how quickly a summit goal can turn deadly when pride or determination overrides basic survival instincts. Her death was documented in the expedition's medical logs and reported to Nepalese authorities, as is required for all climbing fatalities. It's a harsh reminder that the mountain isn't forgiving. No amount of preparation, money, or drive changes the fact that ignoring the body's signals can be fatal. Even after the incident, the evidence left on the route, abandoned gear, disturbed snow, and the path where she struggled, served as a stark visual cue for future climbers about how quickly things can go wrong. Looking at it, I can't help but feel the weight of those final hours. The effort, the willpower, all of it, and yet the body had the final say. That's something that really sticks with you about high-altitude climbing. It was April 22nd, 2014, in the lower Khumbu icefall on Mount Everest, around 19,500 feet. This section is one of the most dangerous on the route, with shifting ice towers, hidden crevasses, and thin snow bridges. Temperatures range from -5 degrees Fahrenheit to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, but wind and exposure made it feel much colder. Every step required careful footing, balance, and reliable gear. Lenora Svek, 39, worked as a fashion buyer in New York City and approached the climb like she did her career, focused on style and appearance. Her experience was limited to guided climbs of Mount Washington and Mount Whitney, where mistakes were minor inconveniences. On Everest, she prioritized how gear looked and felt over its functionality. I could already see this was going to be a problem. The mountain doesn't care about style, only what works. The icefall demanded specialized equipment, insulated gloves, heavy base layers, and full-body protection against sudden cold and exposure. Lenora had opted for lighter alternatives, arguing that bulk would slow her down. Her gloves were designed for moderate cold, not the sustained freezing conditions of the icefall. That morning, guides ran their routine equipment check and again recommended she switch to heavier gear. She refused. I get wanting to move faster or feel more comfortable, but in this environment, comfort isn't really the goal, survival is. Within the first hour, the consequences of her choices became apparent. She stopped frequently to adjust her layers and warm her hands, which were already showing signs of reduced circulation. Each pause slowed the team and increased exposure to unstable ice. Small issues start to stack up fast in places like this. That's how serious accidents begin. One minor misstep, then another, until it's too late. Lenora approached a ladder spanning a 40-foot crevasse. Her gloves had lost warmth, leaving fingers numb. Halfway across, she slipped, her right foot between rungs and left hand off the rail. Her harness caught her, but she fell partially into the crevasse. Still, her body slammed against the ice wall with enough force to fracture several ribs and inflict internal injuries. One small slip doesn't stay small in the icefall. The mountain turns minor mistakes into major consequences almost instantly. She was left suspended, unable to pull herself out. Her numb fingers made it impossible to assist in her own rescue. The team began a rope extraction, but the surrounding ice was unstable, and setting up safely took time. Every minute mattered as her injuries and exposure worsened. Hypothermia set in quickly without proper insulation. It's easy to underestimate how fast the cold drains you when movement is limited and adrenaline can't protect you anymore. The team eventually managed to extract her, but her condition was critical. She was unresponsive, and attempts to stabilize her were limited by the terrain. The expedition's medical officer later confirmed the cause of death as internal injuries compounded by severe hypothermia, with contributing factors including inadequate protective gear and reduced dexterity from cold exposure. The warnings were clear early on, and the contributing factors were present before the incident. The incident was included in the season's climbing reports, emphasizing the vital role of proper equipment. One small detail, like gloves, ended up being a huge factor. Up here, there is no margin for error, no second chances. The icefall remained as treacherous as ever after the accident. The mountain didn't change. The risks stayed exactly the same. And that's the thing about climbing Everest. It doesn't negotiate, it doesn't adjust. It's unforgiving, and it doesn't care about your priorities or how much money you spent. Lenora's death demonstrated how personal preference and underestimating environmental hazards can have fatal consequences, especially when combined with technical terrain and extreme cold. It's sobering to realize that a decision as small as lighter gloves or an easier outfit could set off a chain of events that no one can reverse once it starts. It was May 21st, 2018, on Everest's summit ridge at 28,500 feet, deep in the death zone where humans can survive only hours. Temperatures hit minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Oxygen dropped to 30% of sea level, and the exposed ridge left no room for error. Every step demanded precise energy and oxygen management, and even small mistakes could be fatal. Karen Dolev, 42, worked as a marketing executive for a Fortune 500 company in Dallas. She had built her career on exceeding targets and refusing to accept limits, and she brought that same mindset to Everest. Her climbing resume included Denali and Aconcagua, but she had never spent extended periods above 25,000 feet, where the human body deteriorates quickly, regardless of fitness. She approached the expedition like a professional objective, measurable, attainable, and under her control, but the mountain operates on a different rule set. You can't negotiate with the altitude. It doesn't care how determined you are. The summit ridge is one of the most dangerous parts of the entire climb. Even with supplemental oxygen, climbers must adhere to strict turnaround times, usually between noon and 2 p.m., to allow for safe descent. Guides enforce these rules because the margin for error is minuscule. Afternoon conditions often deteriorate rapidly, winds increase, and visibility drops. Karen had been moving aggressively throughout the ascent, consuming oxygen at a higher than average rate. She was still 400 vertical feet below the summit, already behind the schedule that would have ensured survival. At this point, I could tell that pushing forward was becoming more than just risky. It was straight up life-threatening. When her guide ordered the turnaround, she refused. Karen argued that she was close enough to the summit to continue safely, pointing to other climbers still ascending. She treated the instructions as suggestions rather than life-saving rules. Her oxygen supply was insufficient for both the ascent and a safe descent, but she dismissed the calculations. It's hard not to see this as classic summit fever. The investment, the ego, the mindset that success outweighs survival. Against explicit warnings, she pressed on. By early afternoon, the weather turned faster than forecasted. Winds exceeded 40 miles per hour, snow drove horizontally, and visibility dropped to less than 20 feet. Her oxygen supply reached critically low levels, forcing her to ration what little remained. Reduced oxygen combined with extreme exertion slowed her movement and impaired coordination. Every step required focus she could no longer fully summon. Watching a climber like this, you realize that determination alone can't replace oxygen or timing. It becomes cruelly obvious how fragile the human body is up here. Approximately 200 feet below the summit, Karen's supplemental oxygen was effectively gone. She relied solely on the ambient air, which cannot sustain life at this altitude for long. Hypoxia set in quickly. Confusion, poor balance, and impaired judgment made steady movement impossible. Cold exposure accelerated hypothermia, and she collapsed repeatedly along the ridge. It's a harsh reality. At this height, the environment will win if you ignore the rules. Survival isn't negotiable. Other climbers nearby were also fighting for survival and could not provide meaningful help. Rescue was impossible given the extreme wind, low temperatures, and exposure on the ridge. Karen became stranded, and her body slowly shut down under the combined effects of hypoxia and hypothermia. It's sobering to think how quickly the situation escalates. The summit seems so close, yet the death zone doesn't forgive hesitation or defiance. Despite desperate attempts by nearby climbers to offer support, she never regained consciousness. Her body succumbed to oxygen deprivation and extreme cold. Recovery was only possible later in the season, when conditions allowed safe access. The expedition's medical officer ruled the cause of death as hypoxia complicated by severe hypothermia, with contributing factors including refusal to follow turnaround times and mismanagement of oxygen. The incident was documented in climbing summaries as a reminder of the deadly consequences of ignoring protocols in the death zone. Karen's drive to reach the summit, the same force that fueled her professional achievements, had prevented her from recognizing when retreat was the only way to survive. At that altitude, ambition and determination don't change the outcome. The conditions don't adjust to the climber, and exceeding physical limits at that altitude leads to rapid decline. It was May 11, 2013, on the ascent to Camp 3 at 23,500 feet, a steep, narrow ice route with fixed ropes. Temperatures hovered around minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and wind and exposure made any pause risky. Every step demanded full focus. Hesitation or distraction could be deadly. Noreen Valek, 36, managed human resources for a tech company in Seattle. She was assertive, confident, and used to challenging authority in her professional life. That same mindset carried over to Everest, where she consistently questioned her guide's decisions and safety protocols. Her previous trekking experience included portions of the Annapurna Circuit and Mount Rainier, but she had never faced terrain where hesitation and debate could be fatal. I could already sense that her instinct to argue and analyze every decision wasn't going to mix well with the death zone. The route from Camp 2 to Camp 3 required precise timing and coordination. Climbers depended on the fixed rope system to keep traffic moving steadily, with designated rest points where they could pause safely. Delays in the middle of technical sections created bottlenecks, forcing other climbers into exposed positions and increasing the overall risk for the team. Noreen's habit of stopping mid-route to question instructions had already caused minor slowdowns during the expedition, but on this day, it would prove disastrous. As the team approached a particularly narrow section of steep ice, Noreen began challenging the guide's pacing instructions and route choice. Instead of moving steadily through the dangerous section, she stopped to argue, insisting her concerns be addressed immediately. Other climbers were forced to wait in exposed positions while she debated the plan. From what I can see, this was exactly the kind of split-second distraction that the mountain doesn't forgive. Her guide repeatedly told her to continue and save discussions for the designated rest point, but she refused. The delay created a bottleneck, backing up several climbers on the fixed rope. While focused on the argument, Noreen failed to pay full attention to her footing and body position. As she gestured during the discussion, her crampon caught on the rope, and she lost her balance. The fall was arrested by her climbing harness, but she swung into the ice face with considerable force. The impact caused head trauma and internal injuries. It's hard not to notice how quickly a single lapse of attention can turn a routine crossing into a fatal moment. Other climbers, still stuck in the bottleneck, were unable to provide immediate assistance. The harsh conditions, freezing temperatures, wind, and exposure made rapid help impossible. Noreen's injuries, combined with prolonged exposure, quickly overwhelmed her body's ability to maintain core functions. The guides attempted emergency stabilization, but the technical terrain prevented effective treatment or swift evacuation to a safer location. As hours passed, her condition worsened. Hypothermia set in alongside her injuries, and consciousness slipped away. Despite every effort, she could not be revived. The expedition medical officer later determined that her death resulted from blunt force trauma, complicated by severe hypothermia, with key contributing factors including the delayed response during a critical moment and failure to maintain focus while navigating technical terrain. Watching her choices pile up like this, it's clear how small decisions, stopping, debating, hesitating, stack into irreversible consequences in this environment. The incident was recorded in climbing logs as a stark example of how communication issues, hesitation, and delayed compliance can become fatal in extreme conditions. Noreen's tendency to challenge authority and assert her personal approach to climbing had ultimately cost her life. It's a tough reminder that on mountains like Everest, there's no room for ego or debate. The protocol exists for survival, and ignoring it is a gamble with zero margin for error. Her death illustrated the same harsh reality that had claimed others before. before her. In high-risk environments, prioritizing personal preferences over established safety measures can be deadly. Even experienced professionals used to managing and challenging situations in their work are not immune when the mountain demands immediate compliance. I can't help but feel that every step she took reflected her mindset. But on Everest, the mountain is always the final authority.